Hi, good morning and welcome to the 5th episode of our daily webinar series called Mental Health and Wellbeing in COVID-19. My name is Theron Nightenfit. We've got Mark on the line here with us as well. Say hi, Mark.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Theron. Great to be back with you.
How are you doing this morning?
Yeah, doing well. How's it going your side in the lockdown?
Yeah, good. I see today's the first day we've actually both got a collared shirt on at the same time. So
Steve, you're catching up to me, buddy. You're catching up to me.
I've had collared shirts, but actually, is that true? I think maybe this morning, yesterday morning, we did as well.
You had a tie in one of them. You had a tie in one of them.
You still haven't had a tie. Anyway, we need to get to what we're talking about today. Today, we are going to be exploring a really exciting topic. And the title is called Making Good Decisions in a Time of Bad Circumstance, which I'm sure many people are thinking that this current lockdown is a time of bad circumstance. But that doesn't mean we can't still make good decisions during this time. But as we do, let's first recap what we looked at yesterday before we dive into this episode. So yesterday, we looked at a couple of key concepts. We talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And you'll remember that once food and shelter and safety has been met, we really do step into the relational needs where we actually really start putting value on belongingness and love and connection with other people. And that's a really important part of what it is that we actually value. We then looked at our interdependent brains and how our physiology or how our neurology in our brain is actually set up to be able to interact and connect with each other really well. And there is an empathy that we have which makes us really track with what is going on in the world around us in terms of other people. And then we shared with you a construct around a movement towards relational maturity that Stephen Covey has shared, that ultimately we're not trying to be independent, but interdependent. And really that's where our humanity comes from. And we looked at a couple of things like Ubuntu and what it means to be connected together. And then the key question, of course, that we dealt with was, do we need relationships? And the overwhelming answer that we saw as we looked at it from all these different angles is that, yes, we do need relationships. And you'll remember we looked at that Harvard study of adult development to see that those who had healthy relationships lived happier and healthier lives and lived longer than those who don't. So that's in a nutshell what we looked at yesterday. Today, as I say, we are looking at making good decisions in a time of bad circumstance. So the themes we're going to be exploring today are how daily decisions are driven by emotion, how we can use our emotions to make this time now a time of well-being, and how we can overcome ourselves to maintain good decision-making. So Mark, why don't you kick us off and walk us through? I see we're starting here with a story from Alice in Wonderland. Ooh, I love a good story. What's this about?
Yeah, T, we love good stories at Mygrow because I think, stories resonate with who we are. And I think there's a reason why certain stories emerge as classics. When I was growing up, the story of Alice in Wonderland was just something that for some reason just kept coming around again and again in my life. And oftentimes this is quite a well-quoted part of the story, which is when Alice arrives in Wonderland and comes across the Cheshire Cat. And there's this dialogue that ensues. Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here, is what Alice is asking. And the cat then replies, that depends a good deal on where you want to get to. And she then says, and this is the famous line, I don't much care where, says Alice. Then it doesn't matter which way you go, says the cat. And I'd heard that first little section most of my life, Theron, as I was growing up. And that's kind of where people stop it, then it doesn't matter which way you go. But a few years ago, I went back and read the story again, and this is how it carries on, which I found far more profound in terms of us and our decision-making. Because the cat then carries on going, it doesn't matter which way you go. So, the cat says it doesn't matter which way you go, and Alice says, well, as long as I get somewhere. And the Cheshire Cat, in the cocky way that the cat seems to come across, says, oh, you are sure to do that if you only walk long enough. And the reason I found this quite profound was that, we are heading in a direction in our lives. You are, Theron, I am, all of the listeners listening in, you are heading in a direction of your life. And you're either heading somewhere or somewhere else, but it's definitely going to get you somewhere if you just keep going long enough. And one of the key things I think that we need to ask ourselves is, where do you ultimately want to get to? What is the end result? Another way of framing that is begin with the end in mind. We've got a few weeks, if not months, if not years ahead of us in terms of what coronavirus is doing to our relationships, our jobs, our economy, certainly here in South Africa, but definitely around the world. And, you know, we've got an opportune time in this moment to make some powerful decisions in a moment that's very different to the typical humdrum of life that we have, where we can go forward and actually help people to make decisions in this time. What do you think, Theron?
Yeah, in one sense, it seems like this massive thing that we're calling us to. Where do we ultimately want to get to? As if we need to know right now exactly. It's like when we were in grade 10 and they asked us, you know, what career do you want to do? You better pick your subjects now so that and you're like, I don't know where I want to get to. But actually, it's a very small moment. It's a small moment, and it's many small moments. Just the ability to pick a direction and say, I'm going to go towards growth, or not make a decision, and then maybe by default just end up really small thing. But if you can compound small decisions on each other, in time, when you look back, you'll see that the direction you've gone on, the direction that you chose, could be quite drastic one way or the other. And I think that what we're going to be dealing with today around the whole idea of decisions and decision making is so pertinent for that, because the emotional connection that is present and relevant in pretty much in every single decision is something I think many people don't really know, or don't really understand what's going on neurologically with that. So I'm excited to be able to equip these viewers with some good information, some good insight, Mark. So I'm going to throw the ball back to you. Talk to us about some facts around decision making.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot that gets thrown around about decision making, and I mean, how do you possibly do a research methodology that taps this accurately? But you know, the estimated stats are that that we make on average 25,000 to 35,000 decisions daily, and of course, 70 or so of those are conscious decisions. Others are just, you know, decisions that we make as we go about our lives. And working professionals spend half of their 17.3 waking hours, these are obviously average stats, working. And so we make up to 35 professional decisions each day. There's also some interesting stats about key decision makers in an organizational context. And maybe you can think about this in terms of being a father, Theron, or heading up a home. You know, maybe you're a single mom listening in. But CEOs do an average of 139 tasks weekly. And 50% of their choices, the choices that they have to make in 9 minutes or less. In other words, they've got 9 minutes to figure out what they're going to do and make a call. And only 12% of those decisions have an hour or more of time in which they are able to actually make those decisions. So, I mean, this just means we've got a huge volume of things we're needing to be deciding on incrementally, and also big decisions, and we have very little time to actually process that information. Do you want to jump in?
You know what really sticks out for me there is the difference between 25 to 35,000 and 70. If only 70 of them are conscious, that's a lot of decisions we're making by default. It's a lot of decisions that perhaps we made a decision 10 years ago, and as a result now, today, we're making subconscious or unconscious decisions that we're not even aware of, because we made a decision all the way back then, which has taken us on a direction. And right now we have, you know, an unhealthy diet, or we have an unhealthy relationship with our spouse, or, you know, whatever it is, or maybe it's healthy, you know, wherever it is we are right now is a result of so many of these decisions in the past. And we do really have the power and the agency to be able to make decisions now, in the moment, maybe to even shift and change some of those flawed decisions that we had in the past. It's never too late to change your direction, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I remember that old proverb. We use it somewhere in our content. No matter how far you've gone down the wrong road, turn back. I think it's some kind of Turkish or Chinese or one of those proverbs. But that's been super powerful in my life. You know, I do want to say, Theron, that some of these stats, you know, they're coming from Sheena, I think you pronounce it Liongar, from that book, The Art of Choosing. So how empirically based these stats are, I don't know, but I certainly look at them and I go, wow, that certainly looks like my life. And I'd love us to, as we share some of this content, have a look at a few specific studies on decision making that I think will be really helpful for us to understand the context within which we're making decisions. And then also just have a look at how we can just be a little bit more conscious about making our decisions. So can I keep going? Can I jump into something?
Keep going, yeah.
This is one of my favorite studies in psychology. It's called the ASCH CONFORMITY study. And I mean, anyone that studied any kind of first year psychology will have come across it. Essentially, the psychologists created these two cards. The one card had a line on it. The other card had 3 lines on it, line A, B, and C. And people were essentially put into groups, and groups of 8 people. And the other people in the groups were actually conspirators in the research project. And it was only the last person on the bottom right
what does that
over
mean?
there.
What's a conspirator? Explain what you mean about that.
I suppose it makes it sound like a conspiracy. These were people that were part of the research team. They weren't the person that the research was assessing. So they all were part of what was going on.
So they were planted in there to pretend like they were there to be part of the study, but actually they knew what the study was about, so they were insiders.
Exactly. They were insiders in the study. And the psychologists had said to these insiders, every time I show you the card on the left, and then I ask you to line it up, because this was the task. The researcher would show them that card on the left, and then he would take it away. And, yes, the one of the one line. Then he would hold up the card on the right, well, it's on my right, and he would say, which line is closest to this one? And of course, they would then look at the 2 cards, and each person that was in on it, all the people that are kind of white there, not the green one, would choose B. They would clearly choose the wrong option, saying that this line was shorter. It was like idiotic. And then everyone had to choose and say which line it was most closely aligned to, and they would choose B, 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 until they got to the last person that the research was being done on. And this is what they found in that research. The last person would choose the wrong line, the wrong answer, up to 75% of the time. I mean, it blows my mind. And it blows my mind, because
everyone is watching this. Sorry, Mark, sorry to jump. Everyone is watching this. You guys all think that you're going to be the guy who gets it right, the one in the 25. But no, 75% of you would have picked the wrong number, is essentially what we're saying.
I mean, how awkward. And what was also more extreme about it is, if you have a look on the bottom left over there, when people were one-on-one with the researcher, in other words, there wasn't the peer pressure of other people making a decision that was different. They would make a mistake less than 1% of the time. And so you can see there's a radical difference here when we're being influenced by other people in terms of the decisions that we make. And if we have a look at this lockdown, the people that we're talking to every day are making certain decisions. They are about their lives. They are getting up and staying in their pajamas the whole day. They are eating certain foods. They are watching certain Netflix series. They are spending a certain amount of time on social media, etc., etc. And we have to see that peer pressure is going to have a radical impact on each one of us. So that's one thing I want us to keep in mind, is that there's an influence from the outside in terms of the decisions we make. But then we also need to keep in mind that there is also what we bring to each decision that we make. Let's call this the influence from the inside. And we spent a little bit of time looking at this iceberg triangle model of the mind, with the conscious mind at the top, subconscious mind at the bottom. And, I think we have to realize that because of our whole subconscious story and the way the subconscious mind works, which I think we touched on in episode 1 or 2, Theron, if I remember, we bring our whole life story into each decision that we make. And so we need to approach the next few days of this lockdown with an understanding that we see the world not as it is, but as we are. And maybe I can add to that, as we have become through our life story. And I'd love to just get your thoughts on that for just a moment there. And I know you particularly appreciate some of this concept in terms of human agency and, the impact we have on dynamics.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing that jumps to mind is it's not a binary. It's not, you see there we've got a smiley face and a happy face, which would imply a good story or a bad story. No, human stories, human lives are complicated. We may be super confident in one area of our lives, and that probably is coming out of some kind of something in our backstory. We might be super not confident in another part. We are complicated creatures. And I think that the point we're bringing here is that everything that has gone before it's a reservoir that has filled up in a sense and has led to this moment. And we have that with us. One of the things we like to say at Mygrow is that the subconscious is always with you, because it is everything from the past that is sort of accumulated into this moment to help you see and understand and interpret and navigate the world. Which means, of course, depending on the nature of that story inside, will depend on whether you see the world in one way or another way, essentially.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just aware, Theron, that we're going to spend quite a bit more time on the subconscious mind and how narratively our subconscious develops through our lives in episode 7, which I believe is on Monday. So let's leave it at that until then to elaborate more on that. What I'd love to jump to is just how, because of what we bring to each of these stories from these internal narratives, we end up with 2 types of decisions that we tend to be faced with on a daily basis, on a moment-by-moment basis. And it essentially could be succinctly summarized by decisions that involve what we should do and decisions that involve what we want to do. And it's fascinating for me how often, if we bring in the conversation around emotional addiction and different addictions that we have, how often we choose what we want rather than what we should do. And the main difference here is really that when we are choosing want decisions, it's about right now. It's about feeding our addictions, our almost carnal desires right now. The most explicit example is someone who's involved in a faithful relationship who then, meets someone else, and what they want to do is enjoy this momentary passion thing instead of what they should do, which is remain faithful to their family. To maybe use a less extreme example, Theron, if I just think of myself getting a little older and the kind of BMI that's developing along with my pant size, I know most weekends that what I want to do with my wife Robin at home is to get pizza takeouts, McDonald's McFlurry, and to watch Netflix. That's what I want to do. But what I should do, we should go for a lovely walk outside. We should have a salad. We should
not for the next few weeks, please.
Exactly, we won't walk outside. But there's many things that if in the moment of being torn between the want and the should, typically the little angel on the shoulder that'll say, hey, be reasonable here. You should be faithful. You should be making better decisions around your health. Oftentimes what we do is we listen to the little voice of emotional addiction, voice of comfort on our shoulder saying, but you actually want this. Yeah,
let me just jump in here. I mean, this takes us back to what we were sharing right at the beginning of this episode, that so many of these decisions aren't even conscious. Yeah. So many of these things are just there. They are the accumulation of the story that has gone till now. We've always made these decisions around fast food. We don't even know how to cook, or whatever the dynamic is that has led us to this moment in the story right now. So it's not always as explicit as the devil voice that you can actually hear and the angel voice you can actually hear. So often these things lie behind the curtain. They're unrecognizable unless you do some investigating and really take an introspective lens on the situation.
Yeah. So, what is the best decision between want and should? That I think is ultimately our question. And I would say that the best decision between want and should is the one that leads us closer to where we ultimately want to be. And that, I think, is the key challenge from this particular webinar is, for us to actually make sure that we end up where we would want our lives to be if we could actually choose. And I'd love us to just touch on, go for it, T, sorry.
Well, what I like about that is it's not this binary either or. It's not want or should, because the should is about making those decisions in the moment that do
Yeah.
justice to the long-term direction that we want. Where do we
Yeah.
want to get to? So it's
Yeah.
not a
Yeah.
legalistic versus a pleasurable. It really is about want. It's just, do we want something that's cheap and easy now? I mean, it goes back to the maladaptive coping mechanism. I want to deal with this in an easy way. Or do I want strength and flourishing and growth later on?
Yeah, yeah, you're quite right. You know, I'd love to just touch on a couple of aspects of the neuroscience behind decision making, because I think that might just unravel why it is that so often we make decisions. I know I do, that if I actually were to sit down and plot out my life, I probably wouldn't make those decisions. And let's jump in and have a look at that. You know, one of the key findings in the world of psychology has come about, or certainly in the world, in the field of emotional intelligence within psychology, is the fact that decisions are actually driven by our emotions. You know, the accountants and the engineers and the mathematicians out there have somehow convinced us that decision-making needs to be rational. If I can be rational, in my right mind, not being too emotional, you're being over-emotional about this decision. I'm sure many of you have heard that kind of language before. It's led us to a position where we think that if we can just write down the pros and cons of a decision, we'll then easily be able to make it. And one of the most famous people, if you like, in the world of emotional intelligence and decision-making is someone by the name of Phineas Gage. And this guy was some kind of supervisor on the railroads, and they were busy using explosives to essentially unearth some of the hills or whatever it was that they needed to put these railroads down. And through one of the explosions, there was a horrible accident where Phineas Gage had this metal pole that went straight through his head, literally from under his jawbone straight through the top of his head. And it was quite astounding because they were able to somehow remove this pole, and Phineas was able to carry on life fairly normally. But slowly over time, it became very interesting how he struggled to make decisions. And later on, 100 years or so later, a similar case happened with a patient called Elliot, who eventually was actually working with, he was a businessman, and he suffered a stroke in a particular part of his brain. And at that time, there was a psychiatrist called Damasio that was studying the neuroscience around this. And he noticed that this businessman, Elliot, had damage in his brain in a similar part of the brain to what Phineas Gage would have had with his injury. And he started to look at these different injuries and then obviously at more and more cases. And what he found was that there's actually a particular part of the brain that leads us to make decisions. And the problem with Phineas Gage and with Elliot is they would be able to do the cost benefit around decisions or the calculation of decisions. But when it came to the actual moment of choosing one way or the other, even if it was logically obvious to choose one way, they were not capable of actually initiating or choosing that decision. And what he found, this is Damasio's work, is that there's a little part of the brain you can see on the bottom right over there called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. And this is a nice, lovely big word for what I would just describe as a little part of the brain that sits between the frontal lobes and the emotional centers of the brain. And you can see what we try to depict on the top right over there is that ultimately our ability to choose between A and B, between this kind of life and that kind of life, between want and should, sits in our ability to manage our emotions. And this was quite a profound finding. And that's why decision-making, or the competency of decision-making, sits in the realm of emotional intelligence rather than in the realm of mathematics or engineering or accounting. And so this is quite important for us to understand, because if it sits in the realm of emotional intelligence, which neurologically it does, then we have to be aware of the emotional addictions that we bring, the subconscious realities that we bring, and all of that stuff we've mentioned in the previous webinars, Darren. So that's just a little bit of the neuroscience behind it. And I'd love to hand over to you, because I think that leads us to a key question that we have to ask ourselves in light of that.
Yeah, and I mean, it's no surprise there. It's bringing us back to our same question we asked right at the beginning. It's the question for this webinar. Where do you ultimately want to get to? Where do you ultimately want to get to? The want decisions will get you the, instant gratification, and probably some disaster later on. The should decisions, if you are making them along a direction that you are being intentional about wanting to get to, those decisions each day and each moment will ultimately lead you towards being able to get to that direction, to that place of growth. So the question really is, and this is the question for you today, where do you ultimately want to get to at the end of this lockdown? Where do you want to get to? Do you want to be stronger and fitter because you started a home exercise regime, in the mornings? Or are you going to be weaker and fatter because you just binged on all the junk food that was in your cupboard? Where do you ultimately want to get to? Because the little decisions we make along the way are going to lead us there. And this leads us into a couple of little tips and points of advice that we'd like to just run through with you guys this morning about how we can make good decisions in a time of bad circumstance. So Mark has recently been reading a book where he's found this concept of the miracle morning to be super helpful. Do you want to just walk us through that, Mark? Tell us what that's about.
Yeah, I mean, this is the furthest thing from rocket science, Theron, that I can't believe it's taken so long for someone to write a book like this. But it's a guy by the name of Hal Elrod, and he wrote a book called The Miracle Morning after doing some research on what high-achieving people do in their lives routinely. And what he found is that typically what people do to set themselves up for success is they have certain things that they do every morning. And he then wrote this book called The Miracle Morning. And it's made up of something that he calls SAVERS, is his acronym for it. And what it means is ticking off literally these 5 or 6 different things. Silence, practicing a moment of silence, doing affirmations or affirming the things that are positive about oneself, doing some kind of visualization or picturing a future state. He calls it scribing, just so that it fits in with his what's it called when you put letters together? His acronym, thank you.
Yeah, okay,
so scribing, he calls it, but that's just writing down some of your thoughts or journaling. Reading is another one. In other words, feeding oneself with some kind of new knowledge, and then exercise. So he calls it the miracle morning. And something that I've found really powerful, Theron, is if one can set oneself up for success in the mornings, it becomes much more likely for one to view the world in a better way throughout the rest of the day. And it's part of what we've touched on in the Mygrow curriculum, creating heart coherence, which we'll touch on also in later webinars in this series, allows us to change our view of the world in a more beneficial way. Some of the broaden and build theory from Barbara Fredrickson that we touched on before, and we'll spend more time on later. The more we can see positives, the better we respond to the world. So yeah, that's just a little bit about.
One of the ways I like to think about it is: do you let your day happen to you, or do you intentionally hit the day running? Because if you let your day happen to you, then your week will happen to you, and your life and your world will happen to you, and you will end up fat on the couch or headed down that direction of not growth. Let's keep going and pick up the pace a little bit on these last 2 that you've got here on this list.
Yeah, I mean, these are not things that we need to spend too much time on, Theron. I think, something I've been hearing from so many people is that they're doing some kind of spring clean. They're cleaning up something or doing chores, or I think you even mentioned your wife was doing a spring clean. I wonder if this is
all the
not
old toys that the kids are going to give away.
Yeah. I just look at this time as being a moment for us to spring clean different parts of our lives. If I think of relationships that have perhaps been dampened, or you've lost touch with people, or, a moment where actually you've needed to have a certain conversation with a family member or a friend. I think there's aspects of our life that we can spring clean. And then personal projects. I mean, this is something that you mentioned, and I'd love to check in with you on how you're doing. But, it would be interesting to know who's taken up your call from webinar 1 of doing a personal project, because all of these things mean we'll probably end up at the end of this lockdown in a really positive state of well-being, feeling a sense of achievement, and really feeling good about how we've spent our time. So how's that bathroom renovation of yours going there?
Hey, it's coming on. It's coming on. I'm making progress, but unfortunately, I drastically underestimated the amount of material I would need for the feature wall I'm doing. So I got halfway through it on the weekend, and I've run out of the materials I needed. So unfortunately, I'm not going to get the whole thing finished, but I'm not going to let that trip me up. I'm going to keep cracking on, and really looking forward to this weekend. I'm going to put a bit more time into it. So maybe if you guys, if our listeners or our viewers have come up with any kind of projects, pop it in the comments there in the live stream. Let us know how it's going, and let us know if this has been something you found helpful to give you a sense of motivation and purpose during this time. Okay, so let me also just say,
Theron, that I think we'll be making available a checklist for people to go and do each day to help them through this, to help them take those small incremental steps towards well-being. So go check it out on the Mygrow platform with your subscription in the extra resources folder, and there'll be a checklist there for you to go do so you can set yourself up for success in this lockdown. Thanks, Theron.
Yeah, so let's just return one last time to this question and phrase it slightly differently again. So the question of where do you ultimately want to get to? It is you. It's you who gets to make that decision, and it's you who is going to have to make every little decision along the way to get there. So where do you ultimately want to get to? Maybe spend some time today thinking through that so that you can make sure that this season that we're in, this time that we're in, becomes an opportunity to head towards that direction instead of a roadblock or a detour that perhaps takes you somewhere else. We're going to wrap things up. Just a reminder again that Mygrow has been made available to anybody who has signed up for these webinars. Head on over to mygrow.me and sign up for the COVID-19 free trial that's there. You can see in the top right hand of the screen there. And then, of course, when you're in there, you can go to the COVID-19 tab and you can get access to these tip sheets and see the replays of all the webinars as we've mentioned. That's essentially it for today. I want to thank you so much again for being part of this. I hope that you guys are getting value out of these sessions. If you are, like I say every day, please tell your friends, tell your family, spread the word. Make sure you put a reminder in your calendar if you haven't got the automated reminder to be here, to log in at 11 o'clock. And you may be alone, you may be with others, but we're all in this together. And if we are intentional and lean forward and stay true to the vision and direction of where we want to head, then this will be a time of growth and a time of great opportunity for us. So thanks very much. We will see you again tomorrow.
Cheers, everyone. Bye.